Now, first of all, before we even go into this subject very thoroughly, let us ask ourselves this question: what is divine love? Oh, you say it's very simple. It means the love of God. And God is love. I've heard this since I was a little girl in Sunday school, that God is love. It's very simple. But let us now ask you this question: is it really as simple as people say that it is? I think it may be simple, that is, the idea of divine love, but apparently people have different ideas of just what it is, and therefore it is not simple in the sense that there is no common denominator in the minds of most people as to just what divine love is. People often feel that any love, any feeling of kindness toward another person, or even toward themselves, is divine love. Some people feel that love for nature is divine love. Now mark you well, I did not say that it was not. I did not say that divine love was not love for nature. I did not say that divine love was not love for your fellow man. It may well be all of these things in the right perspective, but I am sure you will agree that divine love must be more, for the simple reason that God, the Creator, is more than the sum total of the parts of creation. In other words, you have man made in his image, the Scriptures report. Fearfully and wonderfully made, our senses report to us. For as we examine the fabric of our physical body, the way it functions, we realize that it is a work of art in itself. The in-breath of the atmosphere, the exhalation of impurity, the constant re-energizing and recharging of the body by the intake of food and air and water. These speak to us of divine love, because divine love has wrought well in our body. And today we're living in a time when people identify very much with their body. Others, of course, who are more polarized along the line of the intellect are perhaps more inclined to identify with the mind. And they think that their mind is very wonderful. And of course it is. Still others are more inclined to identify with the power. So that's why we're going to talk on developing these three aspects of God: developing divine love, developing divine wisdom, and developing divine power. We have placed love first because love is the fulfilling of the whole law. So then, when we begin to ask ourselves just what divine love is, we see that it is much more than just a feeling. And perhaps we should start then by saying what love is not. That is to say, what love is not exclusively. It is certainly not just a feeling. And if it is just a feeling, it is the greatest feeling there is anywhere in existence. But it is not just a feeling. It activates feeling, divine love does. It animates, it inspires, it makes you feel good. But divine love, strange as it may seem, can sometimes make the human feel just a little uncomfortable. You remember that Jesus said, "I am not come to send peace on earth, but a sword." So there we see a strange statement. He talked about a sword. How can a man of God, the Son of God, talk about a sword and say he's not come to send peace on earth, but a sword. We ask ourselves that question, and we have the answers before us, all around us, but many times we are not aware of the answers. We see the answers, but we do not see them. That which makes the human comfortable may not be divine love at all. But that which makes the soul comfortable may be divine love. In other words, we cannot say that divine love is tons of vegetables or food. This is the harvest season. We cannot say that divine love is just a lovely home to live in. We cannot say that divine love is just a wonderful education or a great deal of money or many friends or a good husband or a good wife or fine children or a good reputation, although all of these things are desirable. These things can be the product of divine love, but let's be honest with one another. People have a good home who have no belief in God whatsoever. There are millions of people that do not believe in God that live in good homes and wear good clothes and have nice-looking children and drive nice cars and have status and a good job and security, and they say they're very happy. But they do not have divine love because they have no love for God whatsoever. They'll admit this. They don't even believe in God. So we see that if we look at the outer and say that this is divine love, which it really is, but it has to be divine love when it is touched from within. The golden tone to this picture, the pink tone to be in the pink, the blue tone that gives you that expansive feeling from the wild blue yonder, you know, of Almighty God, the infinite power. All of this starts within and then works out. So let us ask ourselves again and again, what is divine love? We might even drop the divine for a moment and ask ourselves, what is love? I think that most people believe that love is a feeling that they have for someone else, and that that is all that it is. But Jesus and St. Paul gave us a great deal of insight on divine love. Jesus said of the commandments, he said, a new commandment I give unto you, that ye love one another. And he also said something to the effect that if thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, and thy neighbor as thyself, that you shall fulfill all of the commandments. Somehow or other, if we look very closely, we find that divine love and divine law are very close to one another. The law of God by which he framed the universe is very close to divine love. You know the place in Revelations where it states that God measured it so many cubits, that is the temple. He measured the temple so many cubits, this way and that way. This, of course, is the architecture of the New Jerusalem, and Jerusalem means, J-E-R-U is new, and S-A-L-E-M, or Salem, is peace. And so we read in that the new peace. The new peace, the ever-new peace of God, is brought about by the architecture of heaven. And the architecture of heaven is reflected in law. And law is love, and love is law. Unfortunately, somewhere along the line, our emotional body has become entangled. And so we have come to think of divine love as a feeling. It is a joyous feeling, we say. And we identify with the feeling of love just as men identify, and women identify too, both men and women, with the good feeling they get out of prayer, rather than the subject to whom they are praying. It is one thing, and I must in this lecture give you the honest facts because we are going to show how to develop divine love. But in order to develop it, we must understand what it is and what it is not. People actually enjoy praying. Some of the great yogis in India have said that people enjoy meditating on God because they get such a good feeling out of it. And actually, a lot of people enjoy not being burdened with any responsibility whatever. And therefore, they like to feel that their religion becomes a haven, a refuge for themselves, where they can escape from the world. And divine love to them is a haven, a place of refuge, somewhere they can escape from reality. Now, I don't say that reality is out here in the street. That is a very unreal condition. Certainly, it is not the love of God in manifestation. But at the same time, we must have discrimination to see what is coming up through the tree. Because the Scriptures read, "The axe is laid to the root of the tree, and every tree that bringeth forth or beareth not good fruit shall be hewn down and cast into the fire. For the fire shall try every man's work of what sort it is." Now the fire will try the work because only the good can endure. And only divine love can endure forever. You cannot perpetuate anything that is less than divine love. And we can deceive ourselves as religion has done, and as religious people have done for centuries. Again and again we can trick ourselves into substituting a feeling or a sense for a reality from within, you see. God is reality. God is truth. God is light. And the love of God is the love of truth, and the love of light, and the love of grace and graciousness. It's much more than that. But it is the love of love. But for its own sake, not for the sake of the person who is the lover. This is the love that one feels for the beloved that exceeds the love one feels for oneself. And this is the love which God has given unto us, each one of us. He has loved us with a greater love than he has loved himself, and he has taken the substance of his being, body, mind, soul consciousness, and comfortable identity of perfection, and he has poured that out upon mankind lavishly in an unworthy state in order that they might, through learning to love this grace which he is, this power, this wisdom, this love which he is, through loving that, through emulating it, that they might become godlike or in the image which he created them. Man is not manifesting the life of in the image of God created he him. Man is manifesting an image of his own creation which stems from a lack of divine love and an externalization of selfishness. But men are not aware of that selfishness. They think that they are selfless. Again and again we find man creating laws which he then lives by, and believes that these laws which he has created and lives by are God's laws, because they have become translated through his mind and feeling into a reality which is not congruent or does not correspond with the reality that others have, so that you have schisms and splinters and divisions all over the world from the very beginning of time. created in the name of religion and in the name of God, whereas there is but one reality, and this reality Jesus declared. This reality Saint Germain declared. This reality Moria declared. It was this reality that Moria searched for when he came as Melchior to the feet of the babe, the Messiah. And it was this reality that gave the elixir of life to Saint Germain, that he was able to endure century after century, because he drank of the cup of true divine love, which endures. Nothing can endure forever except that love of God. All else must pass away, because the moment you drop down to become a lesser object than perfection, you immediately drop into what we must call transition, or the realm of change, and that is all death is. Death is not real. Death doesn't really happen. If it does, then every night when you go to sleep you die, as Saint Germain has pointed out in various ways. St. Paul pointed it out, perhaps the best way, where he said, I die daily. And so people do die daily. They die to conditions that they are unhappy about, and they die also in the sense of passing away from consciousness in the hours of sleep. Now then, we are beginning, I think, to see a little bit of what love is. Love must be the fulfilling of the law, and the law must be the fulfilling of love. They must come full circle together. Somehow or other, we have interpreted the law as harsh. But I think it would be a far greater deprivation if the law did not function. Supposing that the sun decided not to come up someday. Supposing the sun decided it would violate the law of the cycles, and it would remain. Of course, you know and I know that the sun doesn't come up. The earth turns on its axis. But you see, supposing the earth decided to stop right there, somewhere in space, and it wouldn't turn, what would happen to the side of the earth where there was no sunlight? And what would happen to the side of the earth where the sun continued to bake and bake and bake? We would have freezing cold on one side of the planet, and we would have Sahara deserts on the other, and people would be baking and burning up, and all of our air conditioning systems would not cool the planet. What would happen to the cycle of photosynthesis if the law did not function properly? What would happen to the plants of the world? They would die. And when the plants did not live, what would happen to the atmosphere? As man continued to pour out carbon dioxide, and the plants did not consume it, and so it accumulated upon the planet. The circulation of truth is very important, because there are not too many people that really understand truth in depth. They understand surface truth. Certainly, if I meet you out here, and you come in this yard, and as you're walking in the yard, I say, oh, there's Marie Smith, supposing this is someone that I know or that comes here. And I say, isn't that wonderful? I'm so happy to see her. And I rush out, and I grab both of her hands in mine, and I say, oh, Marie, I'm so happy to see you. It's a real delight to see you. And she exchanges the same pleasantry with me. People observing may say, how loving and kind these people are. How loving and kind the people are at the summit. Well, this is a casual observation. You will find this type of love expressed many places, in many churches. You may find it even in concerts, or among musicians and doctors, or at medical fraternities. You may find it everywhere. The outer expression of divine love, is that what it is? But the outer expression of the niceties of life. Now, certainly we don't frown on that. I approve of warmth and friendship and kindness and these external conditions, as I am sure you do. But there is a great deal more than this surface type of love. This type of love that one person once referred to as ushi-gushi. That was the word that one person that I know used to refer to the type of love that bubbles over, it's effervescent on others. I think it's nice to see effervescent people. I personally like them, but I also like people who are restrained as well, because they are both manifesting the type of feeling that they feel is all right for them. They're bearing. It is their bearing, in other words. It is manifesting. But what is most important is what is happening inside of the person. Now, if the love of God, then, is not exactly the externals, but is an internal action of the givingness of God to us, and our love of God means the givingness of ourselves to Him, how does it affect our relationship with one another? I would say rather profoundly, for this simple reason, that if you and I are giving ourselves to God without reserve, and He is giving Himself to us without reserve, then we would be very kindred spirits, and we should be most harmonious by nature and internally with one another, but not necessarily exhibit all of this in our surface relationships. Now I'll give you an example. Supposing that we were running a dairy farm here, and all of you ladies were taking care of the goats we had here, and the men were taking care of the cows. And I was working for the owner of the farm. I was the overseer. And I would send a group of the girls out to clean the goats and take care of the goats and milk them and bring the milk in, and the men out to take care of the cows. And then you people would begin having a high old time out here in the barns and on the way to the pasture, and you'd begin wasting time, and you would be doing things that would defeat the purpose of the farm. And I would be the overseer responsible for it, and I would come up to you to discuss this. Would I then say to you, oh, you did a wonderful thing if you were actually wasting time and not doing your job properly? I don't think I should at all. Because as the overseer, I would have the responsibility of the whole establishment. And I would naturally have to speak to the sub-overseers, and then, if necessary, to the whole group, to see that the condition that would be wrong would be corrected. And if necessary, if all of these people were truly supposed to be following God, I would not necessarily have to speak to them with absolutely ushy-gushy type of language. If necessary, I could straighten them out with a very sharp word, because God is not responsible for man's wrongdoing, but man is responsible for it. And we then, if we are in positions where we are overseers of one another, we would have to deal with the human. And the human is sometimes rebellious and sometimes stubborn. And therefore, we might express a word of sharpness, certainly not to God, but to the human. And this would not be out of order at all, but someone looking on might say, oh, I think that's terrible. They're not expressing divine love. Well, divine love would not let the wrong type of action go on again and again and again, with no correction whatsoever of that action, because this would be producing the conditions that make for transition. In other words, these are dying conditions. Anything less than perfection has to be changed sometime, somewhere. And the sooner people realize that the law is actually, even the law of curb, is a definite law of love if it's handled properly. Whom the Lord loveth, he chasteneth. I quote. And he scourgeth every son whom he receiveth. Now what this means is that the ego of a person may be corrected or curbed or scourged by God, either directly through conscience or through circumstances in life. But this does not need to interfere at all with divine love. In fact, it reinforces divine love if it's properly accepted. If you accept the word of your teacher, supposing you have a school teacher. In fact, I can go back to my Latin teacher. She was probably the meanest school teacher that I had. Yet I learned more from her than any other teacher I ever had, because she made me work. And I was just a bit frightened of her. But I one time had a talk with her in private, And I learned that she was really a very loving person underneath it all. During World War II, I served under a Captain McVicker, who was of reputation the type of man that is very severe, and almost the entire squadron was completely afraid of this man. Their whole being was filled with fear. I had a private interview with him, which I sought, and he assisted me in finding my way out of a very difficult problem, as a father would a son. And I said to him, Captain McVicker, I said, you are a priceless person. I said, but you're not at all the type of man that the people think you are. He said, and don't you ever tell them that I am not that. If you do, he said, I will certainly really become that for you. He said, I want you to keep my image very severe, for I'm finding it very helpful in controlling the people. And this is often true in life, that some of the people that we might have a little rough spot with turn out to be our best friends after we get to know them, if we are willing to accept. Now, in developing divine love, then, I would like to point out some of the ways in which you can do it. First of all, Jesus said, thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart. Then the first law is to realize who the Lord thy God is. The Lord thy God is certainly not external, but is the true being of man, the true creator of man, the true I am presence, in other words. And what is the I am presence? Notice that I am is tied to the word presence. And presence denotes eternal reality. Not temporal reality, but eternal reality, because it deals with omnipresence. Everywhere present, forever. I am denotes that your being is tied to that. Certainly not your earthly being. For before you came forth from your mother, you first came forth from God. Therefore, you didn't begin to be as a baby in this embodiment, but you were long, long, long before that. So the I am presence, or beingness, or being, this is where you must pay your allegiance. You must recognize that this is something that, while it may be outside of yourself, it is also within yourself. You see what I mean? The threefold flame of that presence is anchored within you. It must conform to the chart, because the chart has the pattern, you see. No matter how we try, we can never get away from the pattern of the chart. It's accurate, it's correct. So we must turn to God and recognize our presence, our I am presence, as our God. But we must realize that the individualized I am presence is the symbol of the I am presence from the great central sun, the universal I am presence. And that is our God, the God of very gods. You see, you have the I am presence individualized, and that is the focus of God for you, the divine image. Then you have the source of your own I am presence, which is the God of very gods, the universal one I am presence, from which all I am presences are projected through mighty light rays. That's from the great central sun. So we must understand that we're dealing with reality, and with permanent reality. And we must understand, in order to develop love for this permanent reality, that this permanent reality is no part whatsoever of error. Has no part of error whatever. And we must develop the feeling of being very impersonal with ourselves. if we're going to develop love for this I am presence. We can give no quarter whatever to the human of ourselves. If we're going to develop love for the mighty I am presence, if we're going to develop ascended master love, our own human is the first one we must deal with rather than deal with someone else's human. And I'm going to tell you at this point exactly what happens in the student body in almost every religion, in almost every organization, including our own, is that everybody, practically everybody that is, begins to practice some form of criticism or condemnation or judgment against someone else's human before they start taking care of their own. You see? This is very, very natural now. But if we take care of our own human first, our very attitude will be so charged with ascended master love that other people near us will feel that this is not an action of our human, but they'll feel that it is an action of the universal law and the universal law of love. And therefore you'll get far less resistance or resentment from people if you're acting from that plane, you see. And you will be developing ascended master love and retaining it because your motive is what transfigures you. I'm going to tell you something that may sound a little unpleasant, but it's important. There are a lot of people in positions such as I am in right now. They're lecturers, ministers, speakers, teachers, and even chief laymen in many religions that enjoy correcting other people. They get a charge out of finding flaws in people. They're happy about it. If you didn't have some sort of fault that they could pick on, they wouldn't like you too well. They like to correct you. And they look for these things because it gives them an opportunity. And this is wrong motivation to begin with, because it is deriving pleasure from evil, and it is completely an enemy of developing ascended master love. So right motive is the feeling of being the great giver to the God who is the greatest giver. In other words, you recognize your I am presence in this development as the greatest giver that has ever existed or ever will exist, now and forever. And then you determine that you are going to be just as great a giver to God of yourself as He is of Himself to you. And this creates a divine balance, because God will never be outdone by you. And the more that you give of your love to Him, the more He is in debt to you, and He pays His debt so promptly that you just keep right on gaining His love, which is infinite, in your finite state. And He keeps on getting more of you. And what He does with it is He changes it into more of Him and sends it back to you. And then, you see, you function from the plane of right motive, and that's the ascended master motive. Your motive then, and it's really tied with motor, isn't it? Motor and motive. It is the force that drives you. The force that drives you then is divine love. In all of your doing, with all of thy getting, get understanding. And in this case, with all of thy getting of God, see that you give this same Spirit of God to others that are your brothers. And this motive, it will change the whole picture. I have functioned from this motive, I'll be frank with you, and I have walked up to people functioning from the divine motive, and I have found that they are still people that will become angry when you correct them, even though you are functioning from the divine motive. And this is a case of where you have to love yourself properly. You cannot be swayed by the human of any other person at all. But that doesn't mean that you should be aloof or rejoice in the fact that the individual has not responded properly to you or to your ministration. God does not. So in developing love for God, you must be as God is. There was a man, I think his name was Shelton, a minister that lived many years ago, and he wrote a book. I think it was called In His Steps, if I recall correctly. And one of the mottos of the book was, "What would Jesus do?" And the men, the businessmen, in this story, pasted this motto or engraved this motto in their offices, and everything that they did, the mayor of the town, when he decided to make a decision, he would ask himself, what would Jesus do? And then he'd think very carefully as to what Jesus would do if he were holding the same job down that this man had. And the whole town was transformed by that one slogan, what would Jesus do? Now, Jesus is one of many ascended masters. And so there's nothing wrong with saying, what would the ascended masters do when you come to deal with any situation? And in the development of ascended master love, you must ask yourself, how would the masters develop their ascended master love? How do they develop ascended master love themselves? Because the masters are still developing it. They have told us themselves that God is infinite. They have told us that after the ascension that they still go on and on and on, transcending whatever they have of attainment and attunement. Therefore, we have to admit that there is infinite possibility. So the question is a worthy one. How do the masters develop ascended master love? And now we come to the prime point here, and that is the activation of right vision. Vision has been referred to again and again. Without vision, the people perish. Now, the wrong concepts about the world and about nature and about one another can cut us off so that we are living in a world of our own making. We are not facing reality at all. Now, I know that I have stood on lecture platforms here and there in different parts of the world. And I know that I have gone with great love into cities where I have prayed valiantly for the people by God's grace. And I know with all my heart that I have sought earnestly to do God's will for different people. And I have had in the audience occasionally, quite rarely, but occasionally, people who have said that they had never seen anyone that came closer to resembling the devil in embodiment than I did. The reason I'm telling you that is to show you that this was the definite opinion of one person in one city. You see. Now then, I have also had them where they glorified me and singled out some member of the audience or someone that was associated with the activity or some other religious leader and came to me and said that they were the devil in embodiment. Well, I have checked into many of these conditions quite closely, and I have found out that there are a lot more good people that are trying to do well than there are people that are trying to do ill. And most of the people who do ill are misguided people. But the fact remains that they have the wrong vision. And therefore, it is important that we get the correct vision about the masters in order to develop the love that the masters have. One of the qualities that many people admire in the masters is their domination, supposedly, over outer conditions. I'm supposed to walk over here, and I just disappear in a puff of smoke. See? This is what we call the sense of the miraculous. They feel that the masters could do that. the masters could go over here and disappear and reappear at will. And they are in love with this idea for themselves because their imagination is stimulated by it. Perhaps when they were little children, they played at this game of I'll go over here and disappear. And it gave them a feeling of elation, but it's an egotistical feeling. I know that I shunned this attitude for many years. In fact, if I may be permitted this reference, I didn't know who I was in a previous embodiment when I started my studies under the Master's direction. I had no knowledge of any of my embodiments at all. And so I said to the Master one time, I said, "You've never told me who I was. I don't know anything about my past lives. And I'm not going to ask you to tell me. When you get ready to tell me, you will. And if you never tell me, I'll consider perhaps it's a wise thing, or you would have told me." And I just simply dismissed it from my mind, and I left it in God's hands. I did not probe it. And then one day, the Master began to reveal one embodiment. And I was rather pleased. And I thought, well, that's really amazing. Very amazing. Well, then he revealed another one. And you know, in a very short space of time, I had 7 or 8 embodiments revealed. But you know, at the time he revealed it, it didn't make too much difference. I had outgrown the idea of that as being too important. And I had gone on to other ideas. And I think the vision that I held was very important for me as I look back over it now. The fact that I was willing to go on, whether or not the Master pleased my human by revealing something that would make me feel that I had been someone either important or unimportant, famous or infamous. You know, one is never sure whether they were incarcerated in the Bastille or whether they were walking along through the wheat fields with the Master. We all like to feel somehow or other that we were on the Master's side, not on Pilate's legion's side, or perhaps the centurion who drove the nails through his hand. We don't want to see that kind of picture. Yet certainly that kind of a person needs salvation, don't they? They need it worse than the people who were walking alongside of him. And God wants them to have it. So perhaps, however, it would be a good thing in the moral climate in which we live, which has exterior righteousness emblazoned in their being, but feels that what they can get away with is all right. Perhaps it would be just as well then if we didn't know all of our past embodiments, especially the infamous ones, because if people knew that we were not someone that was good or beautiful or famous, they probably wouldn't feel too kindly. How would you like the idea of Judas Iscariot sitting in here? Some people would be very uncomfortable. Of course, they wouldn't mind at all if St. Peter was embodied in the flesh and sitting here. They might think that would be fine, you see. So what we must do is get away from our changing person in developing ascended master love. And this does not mean cruelty. It does not mean the impersonality that is cold or unthinking or unfeeling. It means a dedication to a higher image of ourselves. To develop a higher image of ourselves is to open the door for ascended master love. And we cannot mold it in the contemporary image of our friends. We cannot mold it in the contemporary image of even the ascended masters in past embodiments before their ascension, because they made a few mistakes. In fact, Jesus himself told me, he said that if he had it to do over again, he would not have used the thongs in the temple and kicked over their tables. He would have spoken out, but he admitted to me that there had been a certain righteous indignation in his being at the time, which prompted him to do it. he quoted to me one of the old scriptures. He said, "The zeal of thine house hath eaten me up." He was zealous for God. But he said, could I recommend today that you who follow after me should go out into the world and kick over these people's tables and overturn them? If you did, you would be incarcerated in prison, and you would not be able to go on. And he said he got away with it in his day because of the followers he had. And the moral code and the code of that day was a little different than it is today. He was revered as a great rabbi, a great teacher, and he got away with it. Today, of course, Jesus would have been locked up in Queens Jail or in Bellevue in New York if he'd gone down the streets of the boroughs there and started kicking in the established business places. I remember I was with Elizabeth one time up toward Rochester, New York, and I saw a car dealership up there that is occupying a church. They had taken over a church building, steeple and all. I think the bell is even in there, and they had on the church lawn huge signs for the car agency. And I said to Elizabeth, you know, I said, this is one of the times I wish that I had the power to disappear. Because if I could, I'd go in there and I'd start kicking things around in there, and I'd tell them, you've made my father's house a house of merchandise. And then I said I'd disappear afterward, because I wouldn't dare, I said, to have them after me, because they'd lock me up. And this is true. You couldn't get away with it today. But the Master showed me that he himself would not recommend this type of conduct today. Let all things be done decently and in order. Doesn't mean you can't abhor the things that are evil. Doesn't mean you can't speak out against it, but you have to do it in a proper manner, in what we call a Christ-like manner. Without vision, the people perish. We must be transcendental about this. The Masters will be the first to admit that crudities of the past were refinements of the past. In other words, today we would consider some things crude, and yet they were the refinements of that age. Some of the refinements of today will become crudities of a future age, perhaps. We must remember, then, that in developing ascended master love, the vision must transcend itself. And it is not, then, just a feeling of good, but it does produce a feeling of good. It really does. But it must be more than the feeling. It must be a tie to the present in action through us. It must be a conscious tie, because that enhances it all. But we must understand what the presence would do. We ought not to be blind to what the presence would do. We must call for a revelation of the presence. I remember one time when this organization first started, I said to Master Moria, I said, if only I had $1 million, if only I had 10 or 15 people that I could depend on the staff, if I only had this or had that, oh, we'd do wonders. I want to tell you something. I have learned that the mere acquisition of dollars in itself is not nearly as important as learning how to spend that money to get the best results with the money that you have. And the Master started me out with pennies. And then the pennies became dollars, and the dollars became tens, and the tens became hundreds, and the hundreds became thousands, to be used for his work. But I would not have known how to handle it at the beginning. I wouldn't have known what to have purchased. My sense of values would have been wrong. And I've learned an awful lot over the past few years. When a dollar should be spent for advertising. How you can use it wisely. For example, take this property at Beacon's Head. This very house here. We would spend 3 times what we're spending for this house if we were to go out and have Elizabeth and I live separately, as a lot of pastors do, live in our own house, and then have another building for the church, and then have another building for the printing press somewhere, an office building, you know, and then have another building for to house the staff in, or have them living off somewhere else separately. We effect a tremendous savings. In fact, it makes it possible. And we have a much better place here, you see. So wisdom comes in many ways. And also the people. I would not have known what to do with the people. It's a very strange thing. But you take the development of a business form, a record, the record-keeping parts of an organization like ours. This is fantastic. You can ask our staff. They'll tell you that it takes years to develop a certain system. These things are valuable factors of anything, even God's business. And it takes time. And therefore the development of ascended master love takes time. But that's all we have. We have eternity. And we might as well start right and keep on going right. And one of the things that helps then to develop ascended master love is a sense of peace about it all. Not a sense of flurry and hurry. But don't let that peace become the kind of thing that some people do. Now little Sean was taught by Tom Miller to say the slogan of the year, peace with honor. So he came down to have his dinner the other day and sat there, and his mother was serving peas, and he looked at them and he says, peas with honor? So you see, you can actually have a certain amount of savoir-faire on a thing like that. You can even have your peas with honor. You can develop ascended master love about all these different things. And be right motivated, not wrong motivated. There's a right way and there's a wrong way to do it all. And I'm sure that God will speak in the heart to us if our motives are pure. So let's have peace about it all, but let not that peace become the type of peace that is complacency. Let's not be complacent and say, well, I've always done it this way. I talked to a man the other day who is connected with an organization that he knows. At the time that he spoke to me, he knew it. He said he knew it was tied to the false hierarchy. They were imitating the ascended masters, but they were not practicing it. And I said to him, why, in the name of God, do you stay in anything like this when you know what we are standing for? Well, he says, I started with them. And I don't like the idea of change. Well, there's going to be an awful lot of changes wrought inside of all of us before we attain perfection, unless we're already perfect. Now, if you're already perfect, and I'm already perfect, we don't need any changes then. You can't change perfection to anything higher than perfection. You might be able to have divine transcendentalism. God may improve himself, in other words. But at the same time, you can't improve once you get up there into your ascension. You can't improve on that. And we're not up there yet. We're down here. Whether we're here to teach, and we're already perfect, but we're just teaching perfection. That's the only reason we're here. We all like to think that, you know. We like to say, well, I'm one of the guardian spirits, you know, that are down here. Everyone wants to be like at the masked Halloween ball that they had in Chicago. They called it a reincarnation party. Everyone came dressed as they were in their last incarnation, and they were all kings and queens. There was no common people there at all. But let's face it, we're not kings and queens, and we're not all knaves. We have very, very splendid people in the activity, but we must learn to face the reality of ourselves. We must learn to capture the divine vision of what we shall be. I think it was St. Paul that said, now we see through a glass darkly, but then we shall see face to face. Now we know in part, but then shall we know even as we are known. And it is important to realize that the then, T-H-E-N, then shall we know, is the key. And it also can be asked as a question, when? Then or when? See? When is the then, in other words, that this is going to happen? Now, of course, right now. The eternal now, that is the same yesterday, today, and forever. The divine image, the magic of the I am presence. And you, as children of God, must capture the vision of what divine love is, and then outpicture what you see. This is going to change. It won't all be understood at once. The masters have admitted that understanding is evolved. And what does evolve mean? It means E for energy, and this is almost always true universally. E for energy, and volve from the revolve. It means to turn. Energy to turn. In this case, it is energy to return back to God from whence you came. It is the evolvement, the evolution, the turning of the soul within the field of energy so that it is moving forward toward the goal appointed by Almighty God. And you can't be what you can't see. If you can't see God, you can't be God. Therefore, the whole thing is the Vision, V-I-S-I-O-N. See? The victorious I, Son. To realize that you are the son of victory rather than the son of defeat. To realize that your purpose is the purpose we stated first. The purpose of ascended master love. That is your purpose. Be specific. Make yourself identify with the purpose. Today, people identify with ethnic groups. They identify with creed. They identify with race. They identify with family and circumstance, poverty and wealth. They identify with even feelings of fear or feelings of false security. I don't know if you know it or not, but there's a lot of cults today in the religious field that actually encourage people to become ostriches. They want you to keep your head down in the sand, and you say, over and over you affirm, there is no other reality but this or that, you see. We are 100% in favor of affirming divine reality, but you have to have the discrimination that Christ had himself when he looked at the fig tree that was barren, and he said, let no man eat of thee anymore, ever again. If you can't have discrimination to know the difference between good and evil, how in the world are you ever going to eschew evil and cleave to that which is good? You have to know in yourself and in other people what is good and what is evil. Otherwise, you might join the mescaline cult. Maybe you'll turn around and start taking some of these drugs that are going to give you hallucinations of floating around in the Mayan realm down South America, or floating around having visions and psychic experiences and beautiful colors. You know, they don't tell you about all the other side effects and the changes in personality. I talked with a woman out in the West, and she said, everything is good. I said, yes. And then she went on to cite some more, and she said, that's good. And I said, yes. And it reminded me very much of the story I heard several years ago about the Chinese and Japanese having a war, and how the Chinaman was in his laundry there, and the Jap came in and said, we had a big battle last night. Big battle. He said, we killed 4 Chinese for every Jap that was killed. Don't you think that's wonderful for us? Chinaman says, yes, very wonderful. A few weeks later, he came in with his shirts again. We had a big battle. We killed 2 Chinese. Or 3. I think it was 3 that time. Don't you think that's good? Yes, pretty good, pretty good. Came in a little later, he says, we killed 2 Chinese, he said, for every single Jap that was killed. Don't you think that's good? Yes, he says, with a big wide grin. Very good, he says, pretty soon no more Japanese. And that's the way it is with some of these people, you see. They try to create the illusion that everything is good. This woman told me, after I'd had a very galling experience, it was a case of being invited to a party where I was supposed to be honored because of the work I'm doing for the masters. And I found that instead of being honored, that I was being dishonored by attempts to involve me in human argument. And I was asked questions which I tried to avoid about other people and other organizations that I did not care to discuss. And then I was condemned for it, and the person came back to me and said, "Oh, I think that's good. I think it's wonderful." Well, I said, "I don't think anything that is discordant is wonderful." I said, "I think everything should be handled with God control and with divine love." And this is exactly what I'm talking about today, is developing divine love. And I think if you practice divine love, there's something in your feeling world, if you really practice divine love, that you're a different person than those who just function from the plane of ego or ideation. Because they always feel that they're the doer, you see. And this is another thing in developing divine love. Stop trying to feel that you are the doer of good, but become imbued with the idea that God through you is the doer of good, and then watch very closely that you apply to Him for wisdom. Do you see what I mean? Apply your heart to God for wisdom, to see that, as Moria wrote a man recently in a private confidential letter, which I won't tell you who the man was, at the very end of the letter the Master said to him, and he said, "I pray that the light that is in thee be not darkness." And that's the whole thing. Develop ascended master love by being the great giver, giving yourself to God, and being the great receiver by receiving from the great giver God all that He can give to you. Be at peace about all this expansion. Be right motivated. Don't be motivated in your relationship with others by things that are going to make you feel fat and pompous. You know what I'm talking about. But humble, contrite, and generous of heart. But don't even let your generosity become inflated by a feeling that because you have done so much for someone that they should be eternally grateful to you. You should be eternally grateful to them for providing you with an opportunity to do something. Because if you didn't do anything, you would never get there. If you didn't act. We have to act and act and act again and again, because our victory is attained by a series of actions whereby God acts through us and fulfills His law. I run into people who say a complete statement that is an antithesis of what President Kennedy said. They ask themselves, what can this organization do for me? What can God do for me? There is a complete cult of people today in America that actually flourish on the idea of prosperity as being first. They have actually put God behind and prosperity first. And they believe that if any of you people are not manifesting abundance of wealth, that this denotes a lack of spirituality. Sometimes God gives a great deal of wealth to people so that they can do a great deal of good with it. And then again, He tests the same people in another embodiment with a certain amount of lack so that they learn how to handle themselves and learn about how the other half of the world lives. You have all these conditions. We are not judges of one another. We are brothers of one another. And in developing ascended master love, we must be mindful of our responsibility to purpose in whatever circumstance we find ourselves in. Not to think, what can God do for me? But what can I do for Him on earth? It follows as the day, the night, that when God Himself sees you thinking how you can spread His work, spread His word, make the world more beautiful, love nature more by appreciation of nature, study to show thyself approved unto God, so that you can understand more, that God is going to shower more wisdom upon you. God is going to bless you. You are going to develop ascended master love. But it will not be a light that is within you that becomes darkness, but it will be a light that is light and gives light to other people. And then God will be glorified in that. We can't do it from the human level, but we can try. What I'm trying to say is that in the absence of spiritual guidance from on high, let us develop a situation for a moment here. I'm going to come back to that. I'm going to use that. Let's develop a situation. Let's say you meet Joe Smith out here, and he comes to you at the Stratford Motor Hotel, and he says, I have just joined the summit recently, and I want to know how to get out there to Beacon's Head. Can you help me? Now let's say that somehow or other you just don't like his looks at all. You say, well, that fellow doesn't even belong out there in the summit. He's not dressed properly. He doesn't have the right manners. He looks to me like he's just a little bit goofy. I don't think I feel like telling him about how to get there or anything. I certainly don't want him in my car and ride him out there. Why, he doesn't even smell to us as if he took a bath this morning. No, it's quite a situation. Everything tells you something against Joe Smith. Now, how do the masters regard this whole situation? What would the masters do in this situation? He wants to know how to get here. What's going to happen to you if you take him out here? Is this an opportunity? Or is this a time to be persnickety about it all and decide that you're going to? Now, supposing you go to God. This is what I wanted to get at more than anything else. You go to God and the masters and you ask for guidance. And the heavens are sheer lead. You don't get any answer at all. You say, dear Lord, help me. I want to know what to do with this thing, and help me quick, because he's standing here now and he's asking me, what shall I do? I don't know what to do. In the absence of a reply from heaven, what do? When you're developing ascended master love now, and you don't hear from God as to how to develop it, and you ask and you don't receive on the instant, maybe he answered you, but you didn't hear it. What do you do then now? What do I do now, Mama? You know what you do? You rely then on the highest understanding that you have of what's right and wrong, don't you? You go by the things that you've been taught, and you make your own decision, and then you abide by it. And if you feel that Christ would turn the man down, and you perhaps remember Dostoevsky's story about the leper, how this leper kept coming to him, and the man didn't want to have anything to do with him, and he was told to embrace him. And toward the end, he finally wrapped his arms right around the man and drew his leprous face right up to his and kissed him. And at that point, he turned into the living body of Christ, right in his arms. It's quite a story. But the whole idea there is that you have to be the one to go by the Word of God when it's given, and compare the word that you get with also the reality that you know. Because once in a while the sinister will come in on a curve. I want to point out that it is very important that one learn to define what God is, what love is, and then to learn to distinguish in human situations and in life situations what is acting in your world. And then let God act. Let divine love, let ascended master love act through you. And that is the best development there is. It's like the little private out on the battlefield. He says to the officer that's dying there, he says, but sir, he said, I didn't go to West Point. I tell you, he said, I'm making you the captain. Here's my uniform. Take my hat. What's he going to do? He's commissioned on the battlefield. And that's the whole idea. You're commissioned down here by God. You're commissioned. It's the great command. Go ye therefore into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature. The commission from the masters is given to us to be emissaries of divine love. We can't get away from it. Maybe you say you're not as thoroughly trained as you'd like to be. Maybe you sense some lack in your world. What difference does it make? The Master says, look, I'm giving you the commission now. Go and be that which I am. And in this case, the best way to develop divine love then, the best way to develop ascended master love is to act the part of the Master. It's a sort of a vicarious at-one-ment. Being in the framework of what a master would do. What would the masters do right now in this case? Begin playing the role of the master. Don't feel that it's a desecration. This is the final point I want to make. Play at being God, if you will. It's not a desecration. But don't deceive yourself when you play at it. Know when you're playing and when you're serious. You understand what I mean? In other words, if you are acting the part of an ascended master, don't do it with pride now. Don't go out there and try to impress somebody, and don't do anything in order to make yourself pompous or feel big. Do everything to make the universe big, to interpret the greatness of God to others, and you will automatically grow spiritually and expand and expand and expand and expand, because you can't do it phonily. You can't do it by being a phony. You can only do it by being exactly the reality that God is. The world is full of phonies. The only trouble is that most of them don't even know it. Ignorance is bliss. They'd be right with you. They'd be right here today. They'd be standing shoulder to shoulder with the masters if they knew better. Don't feel that you're superior to them. Feel grateful that God has given you this opportunity, as I do. I feel grateful. I don't feel I'm one whit better. I say, but for the grace of God, there I would be. And you know, if you will continue to feel this way, you will have so much light ultimately that it will rub off and rub off and rub off on these people, and more of them will start coming in. What have they got? They've got something. I know they've got something. There's something different about them, and it's quite wonderful. We hear from the hotels at different times. They'll say, you have such a nice group of people. At the Dodge House, they used to tell us what a wonderful group of people we had. There's something different about your people. They're so friendly and yet reserved, and they're courteous, and they're just grand people, and they seem to have something. What is it? Curiosity. It attracts. And ultimately, we ourselves as an organization expand. Ascended Master Love will do it. Nothing else exceeds it. But it has to be real Ascended Master Love, and that's why I opened this talk and started out asking what it is. What is Ascended Master Love? Because people have so many ideas about what it is that I felt it was very important to define it.